Hello, hello. Happy Thursday, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Creating Lasting Change. I am Trisha Dika, and today I'm really excited to be here with Allison Fab, and we're going to be talking about the 5 keys to more happiness and success because who can't have more happiness in life, right? So let me introduce her right now. Allison Fab is a certified chief happiness officer and the creator of the Fab Messy Middle Marketing Method. For almost 2 decades, she has been in the helping profession as a social worker, coach, creator, and change maker, usually all at once. When she advocates for taking a While she advocates for taking a whole person approach to happiness, Allison's main focus is providing simple, practical solutions without decision fatigue, strategy overwhelm, or constant comparison so change makers can become successful and prominent. I want to welcome you, and I really have to say that decision fatigue is really a thing.
Oh my gosh, it's such a thing. It's such a thing for myself as well when I'm not intentional about it. It can
Yeah.
overtake you. Yes.
Yes, yes. So welcome, welcome. Please share a little bit about yourself, and I'm really excited to delve into today's topic.
Thank you. Well, I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. So I've always had a business on the side since I was 18. My very first business was selling Tupperware because, every 18-year-old wants Tupperware, right? Actually, I bet 18-year-olds now want Tupperware. When I was 18, it was not a cool thing to want everything organized like that. But I've always done that in addition to many other professions that have always been in the helping profession. So I love I love seeing the potential in people and helping them reach their potential and live out their dreams. And that's really what I help people do, specifically change makers, so that they can make more impact in the world.
And that's important because we have so many change makers who are really coming out right now and are looking for that direction, that inspiration and empowerment. Because I really want to head back to the decision fatigue because I myself have gotten myself into that where it almost feels like I'm in quicksand and I can't move forward because I just get so wrapped up in my head occasionally.
Yes. And it's super common. And I think it becomes more and more common the more advanced society gets because we have more choices. So instead of having like three types of cereal you could choose from for breakfast, now there's 300. And you could have them all at a snap of a finger if you want to use Instacart. Like there's so many options that sometimes it is to our detriment instead of to our advantage.
Oh, well, we are a want it now society. I mean, even Amazon, it'll be delivered tomorrow morning or it'll be delivered in 3 hours. It's
Yes.
yes, very much so. Yeah. In
Yeah.
one hand, it's awesome because if you run out of something, it's available to you pretty immediately. On the other hand, it's also has its drawbacks, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's pushing us to become more self-aware and
Mhm.
figure out what works well for us and what doesn't work well for us. And if you want to have that growth mindset, I'm sure you've heard of that. If you've heard of growth mindset versus fixed mindset, it's the people who have the fixed mindset, I think they struggle more so with decision fatigue versus the growth mindset. Because if you have the growth mindset, then you can take more personal responsibility for, okay, this isn't working for me. Like, I know I love having all these options, but it's really not in my best interest. So let me cut back some. Versus the fixed mindset might be like, well, I've always done it this way. I've always given myself choices and I deserve the choices. And so I'm going to have the choices, even though it's paralyzing you essentially.
That's a good example. I remember several years ago, I was challenged with some technology, and I was having a discussion about fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And what I found that became so glaringly obvious, it's like I took a belief that I was technologically challenged, and that became a fixed mindset. And today, I changed that belief to I am absolutely capable and I will figure it out. So it was so interesting. It was a summit that we were all talking, and I was like, wow, it's so interesting what we think is okay and we're moving forward with, and it's just this belief that we have. And it's like, wow, that's glaringly obvious that that has become a fixed mindset. So I don't even think we realize the fixed versus the growth.
Well, and that's one of the things that I teach people is to take inventory on a regular basis, whether that's daily, weekly, whatever. What's working? That's the first thing you want to do. What's working? Not what's not working. What is working? Then what's not working? And then what do I want to do differently? So that because what's working for you today may not be what's working for you next week. There,
Mm.
you may, I don't know, let's say you're battling a cold or something. So you may need different tools in your toolbox this week versus next week, or vice versa. And if you're constantly checking in with yourself, then you can see, okay, I need to tweak this a little bit, or this is working perfect. I don't need to change. We're right on track. Let's keep going.
Yeah, and that's important. I really do. I agree with you. I think that's very important that we're constantly checking in to see what's working, what's not, and what has to be tweaked. Now, I'm so curious to jump into our conversation today because, the 5 keys to more happiness and success.
So let me start by saying that there have been numerous studies that prove that happier people are more successful. It's not the other way around. So it's not, yes, money buys you options and choices and all of that, but it's the happiness that leads you to the success. So happier people tend to be more productive. They're more involved in their communities. They have better relationships. And relational well being, which is one of those 5 keys, is actually the number one predictor of happiness. So that, I mean, if you ever doubted that, just look at what happened during the pandemic and how, because so many relationships were, people couldn't have the relationships that they desired, there was a lot of unhappiness and it led to a lot of issues for people. So there's 5 different keys. So it's spiritual well-being. It's SPIRE. It's the acronym SPIRE. So like aspire. It's spiritual well-being, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional. So those are the 5 keys. And they sound really simple, and they can be very simple, but they're not always easy, but they're simple. And then the other thing that's really, really important to remember is that everything is interconnected. Everything is interconnected. So what tends to happen is that people have a tendency to be really great in one of those 5 areas, or maybe even 2 or 3 of those 5 areas, and they neglect the other 2, and it's all interconnected. So because you're neglecting those 2, it actually impacts everything together.
Absolutely. Everything is energy. Everything works. It's the domino, one after the other. So when you're working on one piece and you let the others slide, there are ramification and effects in every area of your life. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, do you want to start with the spiritual? And I can just
Yes.
go through them real quick.
Yep.
Okay. So, spiritual well being, people could think of it as religion or a spiritual practice, but it can be those things. But what it really is presence and a sense of purpose. So, spiritual well being could be taking time to intentionally breathe as you're putting your shoes on in the morning. It
Mhm.
could be a spiritual practice of journaling. It could be walking outside and looking at the trees. Tree bathing is, our forest bathing is a really great thing. So and you can do that even if you're not in a forest. You could just be outside and just sit and be around the energy of the trees. That could be spiritual well-being. Or if you're, more science-based, the spiritual well-being, again, is just presence and purpose. When we don't have that sense of purpose and we don't have something to look forward to, it really makes such a difference in how people feel about themselves. And you don't want to go work. You don't want to work on your business. You don't want to work on anything when you're like, meh, life is just meh. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes. And it brings up a level of frustration and resentment because you don't have that direction within that spiritual sector.
Mhm.
I totally can relate. I've recently been talking about mindfulness
Mhm.
versus mindlessness, how
Oh, I
we're
like.
going about our day mindfully or we are going about our day mindlessly and things are just impacting us from every which way. So
Mhm.
it's almost like we're on this roller coaster and we're just not paying attention. So it's really, really big to be intentional.
Yes, and I mean, that's a great one word to sum it up is intentionality and presence. Well, I guess the two words. That would be the spiritual part. So meditation, mindfulness, those journaling, like those all can fall into the spiritual category as well, even if you don't have any kind of religious or traditional spiritual practice. It doesn't have to be that. I think that word sometimes scares people off, but
Mhm.
it's that spiritual presence.
Yes.
So that's the S. Do you have any questions on the spire? That they're the S in the spire, the spiritual well-being
No,
piece.
but keep going. I'm excited to
Okay.
hear more. Yeah.
Okay, so physical well-being,
Mhm.
which is obviously, being mindful of what you consume physically, moving your body, um, getting enough rest, all of those things, again, are tied to everything else. I'll use myself as a prime example. When I don't get enough sleep, I am grouchy pants, and it impacts everything. It impacts what I eat too. Like if I don't get enough sleep or if I don't eat well, then I can feel it like in my brain. Like I can't focus as well. I don't want to get up early and do anything extra. I don't want to have any kind of spiritual practice. I'm like, I need sleep
Mhm.
because that physical element is so important. So that's the in the training that I've done, that's the physical part. But I think that the physical part also covers how we um, feel about our appearance and how we take care of ourselves and how we present ourselves as well. So just as something as simple as putting on lotion or like coconut oil or something like a moisturizer can make all the difference in the world. You're making sure that you drink enough water, like staying hydrated is so important. It's those little bitty things that we don't realize have such an impact on everything else. So that's the physical well-being part.
There, I exercise anywhere from 5 to 6 days a week. And I
Great.
tell you, to this day, I will sit in my chair and make up every excuse in the book why I don't want to exercise. Listen, it's all transparency, right? However, what I've noticed is when I do not do that, I do not feel good. So when I try to make excuses, and I can come up with some doozies, I actually say to myself, in an hour, will I feel inspired and active and ready to go? And the answer is always no. So I get up to do that. I love the after effects of what
Mhm.
exercising does for me, that energy, that empowerment, that feeling good. So, not every like that physical piece for a lot of people can be tough, but what I find tougher for me is not doing it, 'cause then I physically do not feel well.
Yeah. And I think it's important for people to know, like for me to hear you say, I've done this for years. I do it this many times a week, and yet I still don't want to do it. Because I think so many of us think, well, if we should want to, like, what's wrong with me? I don't want to do the things that are good for me, right? I think there's a Bible verse that actually talks about that. But it's human nature. Like we resist the things that are sometimes good for us. So one thing that I like to tell people is to just 2 minutes. 3 minutes if you're really great, but 2 minutes, just 2 minutes of something that is in the area that you want to work on. So if it's physical movement, set a timer for 2 minutes, walk for 2 minutes. Um, I've been doing lymphatic drainage off and on for I'd say probably the last 2 years. And that alone makes such a difference. And sometimes that's my physical movement. I'm like, I know that I need to move my body, and that's the way that I'm moving my body. So it's kind of making a game out of everything. That's the easiest way to motivate yourself is like what are little bitty small wins that you can get in each category that are going to move you forward? Because if you do that, for example, you know that you feel better afterward, but maybe you still just don't want to do it. But then you make yourself do it for 3 minutes and you're like, okay, this isn't really that bad. Like I remember how I'm going to feel afterwards. It's a reminder to yourself to keep going.
Yeah. Yes, I actually do more, but it is I do. There are days I will sit there and debate. Do I really need to do this? I really don't to. You really, and ultimately, it is important for me as part of my daily rituals, daily self-care. That's why I end up getting up and going, all right, we're going to do this.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
really good. And it's something to celebrate that you're taking care of yourself. I mean, we feel so much better when we take care of ourselves.
Mhm.
So,
And you're
okay. So,
right. We are very human, and not everything works for everybody, and it's okay. Like, I'm glad you brought that up because people do feel bad when they're saying, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. But ultimately, they also have to allow themselves those emotions to be human, and it's okay because I'm sure all the trainers out there have days where they don't want to do it either.
yes. And you mentioned, so there's two things I want to add. I want to talk about stretching, and then I want to talk about the allowing themselves to be human.
Mhm.
So my mentor, the actual so I have the certified chief happiness officer training, but I also went through a it took me about 2 years to go through. It's at least it's a year plus training for becoming a certified happiness trainer. And the person who created that through the Happiness Studies Academy, he talks about permission to be human. And that's what it is. Like, we have a range of emotions. We're not going to feel happy all the time. It's aiming indirectly towards happiness that really gets us happier. So it's not like beating yourself up where I need to exercise because it's going to make me happier. No, it's knowing that when I move my body, I feel better. And when I feel better, I might make a phone call that's going to make me happier. It's those little bitty things. And when you have when I said that it's a really good idea to make a and check in regularly, what's working, what's not working, and what do I want to do differently? When you do that over a period of time, you accumulate a list of your own blueprint for what works for you, and you have that to refer back to. So you could count stretching as physical, like it could be in the physical element, because stretching sometimes is all that our bodies need, and that could move you forward to the next thing. If if you feel really tight or something, you're not going to want to get up and walk around. You just want to just lay there or sit there. Like, if your body doesn't feel good, so you think that it's going to hurt to go move, so maybe just stretch, and that's your physical movement for the day. It doesn't have to be anything extravagant.
Yeah, I really like that. I really do think it's important for people to not only that, understand their limits. So your body does
Yes.
hurt.
Yes.
You don't have to do an hour exercise or a half hour exercise. Do what your body's asking you for. So
Mhm.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's a great point.
Yeah. And sometimes your body's asking you for rest. Sometimes it's like, okay, you did not get enough sleep, or you have not been getting enough sleep, and you need a nap.
Yes.
It's like the little kids. Sometimes they just need a nap.
Yes. Yes.
So,
And naps are okay.
yes, they are. They are. They're actually really good for you. So, you have to figure out what your body likes as far as a nap goes as well. Like, it's, if you kind of look at your life as a science experiment, it makes it a little less, mm, I was going to say overwhelming, but more like there's less shame involved. If you don't get it right, you're just testing it out to see whether or not it's going to work. Like, just because it works for your neighbor doesn't mean it's going to work for you. Or again, just because it worked for you yesterday or the week before or last year doesn't mean that that's what's right for you right now.
Mhm. Yes, perfect example. We're always
Okay.
evolving and changing. So yeah.
Yes, we are. We are. We are.
Mhm.
So speaking of evolving and changing, that ties into perfectly the next one, which is intellectual well-being.
Mm.
So intellectual well-being is the concept of constantly learning something new. So if you look at let's look at people who, as a general rule of thumb, people who retire. When they retire,
Mhm.
what's the average outcome? They don't tend to live much longer after they retire. Why? Because they're not learning new things. They don't have a sense of meaning and purpose sometimes, because that's the spiritual element. But a lot of it has to do with they're just kind of like, "Meh, well, here I am. Like,
Yeah.
I don't really know what to do with my life now." But when we find people who are constantly learning new things or taking new courses, or they're learning how to sew or cook, or it doesn't have to be anything big. It could be reading something very small, but we're using our brains on a regular basis. And there's this fascinating study done. I I have the study on my Instagram, so I can't remember. I I'm I'm really great on like remembering the concepts and not the details. So if you want the information on who did the study and when the study was done, let me know. But there was a study done on elderly men, and they were put in a group in a room, not a room. They were forced to live together for a little bit in this area where everything looked like it was when they were younger. So they had they had newspapers from previous years. They had pictures on the wall that looked like, I think it was like 2 decades prior, maybe. I can't remember exactly. They were served food like they were before. They were talked to like they were talked to like their younger selves. I want to say it was probably like when they were in their maybe 20s or 30s versus now they're, in their 60s or 70s when this study is going on. And they measured their telomeres, which those are one of the things that can tell like how much you've aged. They measured their fingers, and afterwards, because they had lived in this environment where they were learning and they were acting younger and they were being treated younger, they actually came out healthier, stronger, like better blood pressure. Some of them, their fingers actually like appeared longer, their telomeres appeared longer, all because they were learning again. And so much of it is mindset. Like, what are we, how are we feeding our minds? Are we telling ourselves that we're old? I hear so often people say, like, oh, I've hit 30 or I've hit 35. Like, it's time for like everything to hurt, or I have to carry around a bottle of ibuprofen all the time. I'm like, no, I don't think so. And I'm significantly past that age. Like, it's really your mindset. I mean, people like it makes such a difference. And when you're constantly learning, it helps you to be happier. You have more information to talk to other people about. You can have conversations. You can stay up to date. And it's stuff that you want to learn. It's not stuff you have to learn, but like, what do you desire? Like, what's something fun that you always wanted to study and you never gave yourself the chance to study? Just spend a little bit of time doing that.
They say learning languages is very, and good for the brain and expanding and creating those new neural pathways.
Mhm.
And you're absolutely right. It's like people reach a certain age and now it's all of a sudden downhill, which I don't understand and can't fathom. However, it is mindset, it's beliefs, it is what we bring into ourselves, into our environments internally every single day. I recently had a conversation with somebody who said, she goes, I spend a lot of time scrolling my phone and now this song is stuck in my head. And I go, and what are the words to this song? And she started to tell me, I go, do you understand that you are actually creating beliefs and new neural pathways based upon those words? And it was
Mhm.
dead silence. We tend to have a very bad habit of scrolling through our phones. I've caught myself too.
Mhm.
And like there's an Eminem song I really like, but when I sat one day and I really listened to the words, I'm like, "Oh, no, we are not doing this." Um, and people don't realize that when they're singing and they're not paying attention, it's just embedding. It's embedding. Because you're
Mhm.
bopping around singing to a song, or you're just scrolling, and all of this just going straight into your subconscious, and it's
Mhm.
creating these new beliefs.
Which on the flip side of it is really great because it shows us how much power we have to put those new beliefs in. But when you're not aware and you're not checking in, then you're causing yourself more harm than you realize. I don't know whether or not it's factual. I've never looked it up as far as like history goes, but I've heard the saying before. The reason that words are it's called spelling, like to spell out a word, is because your words are a spell. Like I
Yes.
said, I don't know if that's factual or not, but it makes sense logically.
It does make sense, and paying attention to the words that we use is also very important because and I actually just did a post about that today because there are so many words that people use that they're not realizing your brain doesn't recognize these words. So what are you inputting into yourself? It is super important because our brains are super powerful, so our intellectual sector is something that can really change our lives if we're paying attention
Mhm.
to it.
Mhm. Yes. And again, so talking about how everything is interconnected, if we're listening to words and not realizing it, that talk about how unhappy we are. Let's talk about like in relationship. I don't know. I grew up listening to country music. I grew up listening to lots of music, but I grew up listening to country music with my dad when I was younger. And I remember I was in my 20s and I had a coworker who was trying to have me listen to more positive music. And I was like, well, I listen to country music. Like, that's not bad. She's like, what are you talking about? That's about drinking and breaking up and heartbreak and all this stuff. And I thought, I never paid attention to that before. So it's all like, does that impact your relationship? Because you're singing words about heartbreak or, just like, woe is me. Probably, even if it's just like 10%, 10% adds up over time.
Uh-huh. Yes, it does. Mhm.
Which R is the next one in the keys. And R stands for relational well-being. And like I said, relational well-being is the number one predictor of happiness. So that doesn't have, and that can be any relationship. That could be a relationship with your plants, if that's what it needs to be. But it could be a relationship with your pets, with other humans. It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, but all of those things play such a big part. So being aware of what you desire in relationship and
Mhm.
I think constantly taking inventory of what feels healthy, what doesn't feel healthy. I mean, I'm in my 40s and I have been in the social work field for over half of my life. I've been in the helping profession for over half of my life. I've been a coach for over a decade, and yet I still have plenty of work to do. Plenty of work. I'm constantly like, oh, there could have been a healthier way to handle that, or I like this and I don't like that. It's being self-aware and being okay with the fact that we're all learning and growing, and finding those safe relationships to do that in is key. It's key 100%.
Yeah. Just your relationship with yourself. People
Mhm.
don't give themselves any time alone to even figure out what they want. So that I think is super, super important. I'm glad that that is the strongest pillar, the foundational piece. I think because as we have those relationships with ourselves, that's what creates that ripple effect to relationships with plants and animals and people and family and what your expectations are and how you want things to change and being okay with things shifting and changing as you all grow.
Yes, because you can't expect someone to give you something that you're not willing to give yourself,
Mhm.
or that you can't even articulate clearly. And if you haven't experienced it for yourself, with yourself, I don't think that you have as good of odds as being able to explain it to somebody else. Like if you say, well, I want you to love me this way. Okay, well, what does that look like? Um, I want you to, say kind words to me. Well, do I say kind words to myself? I want you to, I want you to hug me and, give me that physical attention. Okay, well, do I take care of my body? Like, am I making sure that I'm stretching and that my muscles feel good and that, I'm, like I said, taking care of my body? It's that, again, that awareness of self responsibility and everything being interconnected.
Yeah, because you could see one absolutely affects each one of those. So if you're out of alignment in spirituality, it tends to overlap into all the other ones. And I think especially the relationship, get the relationship pillar, that's the one, if you're out of alignment there, that the rest of them will be out of alignment as well.
Mhm.
So what is a good way to get into alignment?
For relational well being,
Mhm. Yes.
I would, I really, really recommend to, so there's this, it covers everything. but it's called ascribe, describe, prescribe. So it's for so you're going to ascribe. So you're going to score yourself in those 5 different elements. You're going to score yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. What would you score yourself? So let's say it's in relational well-being. Is it a 5? Okay. Now you're going to describe. Why is it a 5? And then you're going to prescribe. What is it that you need to make it a 10? And when you stop and check in with yourself, you will become more aware of what's missing. And we don't, like you said, we don't take time to just be with ourselves. Most of the time, we're going to scroll our phones instead. We're going to do little chores or tasks or whatever. Like everybody has, a 10-page long to-do list. There's plenty of other things to do besides taking time to actually just sit. Like, that's a waste of time. Why do you want to do that? So that's probably the easiest thing, is literally just asking yourself. And one of my favorite questions, I can't remember where I learned this, but one of my favorite questions to ask when you hear "I don't know," because that is that's a go-to when people don't want to deal with something. I don't know. They don't even listen to the question. Like, okay, well, what would change it? I don't know. Okay, so the question you want to ask yourself is, if I did know, what would I do? Or if I did know, what would the answer be? And it's like this magic little switch that sometimes just gives you the perfect answer.
And it's interesting you say I don't know, because several years ago, I don't recall the conversation my husband and I were having, and I'm like, I don't know. And he looked at me and flat out said, "That's bullshit." And I went, "What?"
It catches you off guard, huh?
Yes, yes. Now answer the question. And it took me a second, because sometimes it's an automatic defense, because
Yes.
what's behind it may not always feel good.
Yes.
And it's facing that. And it was one of those situations with me where I was like, oh, I have to look at this piece right now. I do know, but I have to look at this piece as well, and have to handle this piece in a better way. So when we do say whenever I come up and say I don't know, and I ask myself, well, is that the truth? Because for me, it's like, are you trying to put something out of your perspective, of your purview? Or is it that something is, you may not know in this moment, but you're working to get towards the answer? So there's a couple of questions, but yeah, my husband did. He called me out on me saying, I don't know.
And that's so great that you have that safe relationship to be able to do that. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people are missing. They don't have that, whether that be in the workplace, in their romantic relationships, their partnerships, even their friendships. It's not safe enough to be honest. And so we're scared to actually answer truthfully. So we don't want to answer it ourselves either. And what I'm noticing, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I'm noticing a trend, especially with young kids, that they just shut down. If want to, they don't want to talk about something, or they don't like something, they literally just shut down. Like, they will look the other way, or just put their heads down, or just shut down. And that is like, what's the world going to be like if this is what 4 and 5-year-olds are learning? I am one of the many positions that I have is I teach entrepreneurial skills to elementary school kids. And I've been working with kindergartners the last couple semesters, and I'm noticing a trend, and it's a little bit scary, to be honest. I'm like, if you're like this now, and so many adults, they want to be as loving as possible, and so they're like, it's okay, go ahead, feel your feelings, but they're not really feeling their feelings. There's a missing gap, I believe, which relational well-being, or not relational, emotional well-being is the last piece, so emotions, but there's a missing piece to actually being able to deal with your emotions versus just shutting down. And like you said, it is a defense mechanism, and I understand that. I mean, I've post-traumatic growth is probably the story of my life. And it's the story of a lot of people's lives. But, everybody experiences some forms of trauma, and kids are no exception to that across the board, whether you live in a very blessed,
Yeah.
healthy household, there's still trauma. Like, we all are exposed to different kinds of trauma. But we need to know that it's safe enough to stop and be like, okay, well, what is the answer to the question? Why do I feel this way? Why do I want to shut down? Why am I upset? Or why did I, accidentally hit the other kid and now I suddenly feel terrible? Let's talk about it. It's okay to talk about it. Doesn't mean you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, I agree. There is not a level of safety having these types of conversations, and you're starting to see it, coming down
Trickle down.
to the little kids. Yes. Mhm.
Hmm.
And people are afraid out in public to have, if something's happening, they don't want anybody looking at them, noticing them, or handling their children. So there's so many pieces to this that when one ignores it, we learn from parenting, especially when we're that young, what our parents or who's closest in that circle are doing.
Hmm. Yeah. And again, with that, I know I keep really honing in on everything is interconnected. Like that's setting you up for your relationships into adulthood as well. If
Mhm.
you learned, to shut down or not talk about your emotions, then you're going to get into relationships where you don't talk about your emotions, and or you're drawn to other people who shut you down. And
Yeah.
that's not how you're going to grow. And unfortunately, just like you said, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. Like I said, this is very simple. Like, a lot of this stuff is very simple, but it's not always easy. It's definitely not always easy. To be able to like feel your feelings is not always the most fun experience by any means.
No, it's not. But that is how we grow. That is how we expand. That is how we move to our next level of humanity,
Mhm,
of individuality,
mhm.
is being able to look at these things and, you're right. It is simple. It's not always easy. It's not always easy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So emotional well-being is the last of those 5 keys, and emotional well-being really goes back to permission to be human, feel your emotions, and let them move through you. Because we've seen, I mean, there's more and more research coming up that if you don't process your emotions, they stay stuck in the body and they come out as other ailments. They come out as physical pain. I know I have experienced migraines since I was, I don't know, I think 13 or 14 was the first time that I remember having them. And over the years, I've eliminated lots of different things, and I've seen where situations cause it, and it tends to start with tension and stress. Okay, well, then I need to look at what's causing the tension and stress. Is it sleep? Is it something physical? Maybe. Did I eat something I wasn't supposed to? Maybe. Or is it that I'm worried about having a conversation that I need to have? Okay, well, I need to figure out how to deal with those emotions. Is it that I'm, bored with life, and so I don't have that sense of meaning and purpose? Or maybe I just need to learn something new. I just need to learn about a new supplement to take, or I need to learn a new stretch. Like, everything is so interconnected, but our emotions are such a key piece to it. So we really need to and let ourselves feel them and move through them. And now there's so many simple ways to do that. I mean, you can, do tapping. I don't know if you know anything about EFT. And you don't even have to, when I learned that, I learned it with words, speaking through all of the different points. But you don't even have to speak. You could literally just tap on the energy points and breathe through. There's box breathing. Box breathing is probably one of the simplest things to help regulate your nervous system and, your emotions. So it's just inhale for 4, and there's lots of different numbers, but this is the easiest one for me to remember. Inhale for 4, hold for 6, exhale for 6, and just repeat that. And then you'll kind of calm yourself down. And when we're a little bit more calm, we can look at our emotions and our situation a little bit more clear-headed and move on and make a little bit more of a higher self choice moving forward.
Yes, yes. When we get stuck too in our heads, the best thing to do is step back and I like the tools that you used, the breathing. I will do EFT, but I tap into the positive affirmations of it. So when I'm shifting my beliefs, I use EFT that way. Um,
Mhm.
I love to journal when I'm feeling off. I'm like, oh, we're going to go put some pen to paper and we're going to see what comes up. And, you know, we have to, absolutely, because address those stagnant emotions, because if not, illness becomes prevalent.
Mhm. Yes. And I've seen it. I've seen it firsthand. I've
Mhm.
seen it in immediate family members. I've seen it in my, social work clients as well. And it's amazing. I love the stories of transformation where people have the illness and then they realize how much more power they have over their own lives. Not that that's always the solution, but that they have so much more power and they start dealing with things and they start
Mhm.
healing. It's so beautiful. Myself as a prime example with the migraines and gluten. So I eliminated gluten. It was probably like maybe 6 years ago, and I once I eliminated it, I was like, okay, I have way less migraines because I used to have multiple migraines a week, and I had way less anxiety. And so it's been like what I say, at least 6 years since I eliminated the gluten. And the few times I would have gluten, I had gluten and it was accidentally, I instantly had a migraine that lasted for like 3 days. So I was like, okay, I know that there's an issue with the gluten. I didn't want to be tested by a doctor because I didn't want to be told what to do. So I did my own little, test, and that's how I eliminated it. But I have been exposed to more and more gluten over the last year and a half, and I have been in a much healthier environment in multiple areas of my life, and I'm not reacting the same at all. What do you know? It's all interconnected. Like I'm healing on the inside as well as I process emotions and become even healthier.
And that's really important, because the more you again, it's the ripple effect outward. The more
Mhm.
healing we do within, it becomes a ripple effect. And each one of those pillars that you spoke about today are all interconnected.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's super important about emotions, because people talk about emotions, but they don't really, they gloss over it. I don't really have not heard a really deep conversation in regards to emotions. And I'll tell you that emotions that we bottle up and hold create these issues. And that's what we have to address. When we address the root causes and we allow those emotions to have a presence so that we can let it go, so many things just get better very quickly.
Mhm. Yes. And I don't know tell me if you agree with this or not, but it seems like people are ashamed of their emotions.
Mhm.
They feel guilty or ashamed that they feel bad or embarrassed or behind or whatever the emotion is, or angry or sad. And so then they try to block it.
Mhm.
You notice this as well. So what has helped me as well with this is numerology. I don't know if you knew that I'm a certified numerologist. So with numerology, there's different energies to each day. And then we also have our own energetic codes, like based off of, the day that we were born within the year. And when I when I look at the energy of the day, there's a high side to the number and there's a low side to the number. And so if I'm like, I am like overthinking everything today, and then I look and I see it's a 3 or a 6 or a 9 energy day universally, I'm like, oh, okay, it's not really me. Like it's just kind of like the energies of the day. And for some reason, it gives me permission to like move through it faster because I don't feel quite as responsible for it, even though I am. But like there's other things that are impacting it. And so it feels a little bit easier to I'm not beating myself up as much about it. So that's another tool that sometimes helps people.
Yeah, is being open to it not always being our fault, you
Yes.
know? There are collective energies that we do feel. So
Mhm.
we may all of a sudden go from happy and now we're like, I don't know what just happened. I crashed. And it's interesting because there could be a collective issue, an earth issue, something, because again, it's all energy. Everything in the world is energy. So
Mhm.
it's waves coming through us that we all can definitely feel. And we get a choice to either respond and allow it, or we can react and fight it and resist it.
Mhm. Yes, and the goal is responding
Yes, the goal is
in all
responding.
things. Yes.
Yes, yes. Resistance tends to backfire on us. However, I do talk a lot about resistance. Sometimes when we have resistance in our bodies, it's our intuition speaking to us, telling us
Mhm.
yes or no. So, guys, when I say resistance, it can definitely be more than one thing. It's fighting against something instead of feeling where it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then the reacting is like where you're like, I'm just reacting. Like I'm like, that made me mad. Ugh, here, I'm mad. Versus that made me mad. Okay, why do I feel mad? Let's check in for a second. So you're responding. You're not quite as reactive. And our reactions are good. And instinct is good. And knowing what's triggering us or like feeling different things in our body is great. They're survival skills, but they're not always the best thing in every situation. We don't need to, we're not in emergencies all the time. And I think our bodies are so conditioned to be in fight or flight or emergency mode that's why it's important to take that time to just be with yourself. Even if it's 5 minutes, it doesn't have to be long. And that's probably the biggest barrier for people, myself included at times, is that we overestimate how long something is going to take. I
Mhm.
mean, we can also underestimate, but when it comes to things that are uncomfortable, we tend to overestimate how long they're going to take. And people tend to be, they either seek pleasure or they avoid pain. And in those situations, you're so focused on avoiding the pain that you're not seeking the pleasure. But your exercise example was beautiful. It was perfect of you were seeking the pleasure. That's what drives you to exercise every single day is that you know how good you're going to feel afterwards. So you're not focused on avoiding the pain, the discomfort, whatever, like the part that you don't like. You're focused on seeking the pleasure.
And the other thing that I've noticed with myself is all of your pillars, I do something towards daily.
Good.
I find that if I do not, let's say, for example, I get up and I'm running late and I have a 9 o'clock start and I wasn't able to do something, I find I'm a little off kilter for the rest of
Yes.
the day
Mhm.
unless I stop and kind of regroup and recharge myself. So even though I attempt to make excuses not to exercise, I also recognize that it is part of me as a whole and it is necessary for me to feel good. And that is more important to me than not being in alignment with it. Like it's more important. And I also really want to point out one other thing. When you were talking earlier, is the level of curiosity, is trying to find out. It's being curious about ourselves instead of
Yes.
just blocking it off. I don't think people realize that it's okay to be curious about yourself. It's okay to ask these questions. So that curiosity, I think, is just so profound.
Yeah. It makes me think again, like I that's one of my favorite parts about when I get to work with the little kids is their natural curiosity and their questions for something. I was a very curious child as well, and I think at times it sometimes annoyed my parents, which I get, like,
Mm.
when you ask the same question, but why? That's always been my question. But why? Like, why is it that way? Why do we do those things? Which has served me in a lot of areas, but it has also got me stuck in certain situations because I'm over analyzing versus taking action. But yeah, that childlike curiosity of like, why am I doing this? Or what would be more fun? Or how could I do this differently? Is just make it playful and make it a game. And it takes so much of the pressure off and allows you to just move forward with the little bits every single day. It doesn't have to be super complicated. It doesn't have to be super rigid. Just moving forward in all those areas every single day. And I'm so happy to hear that you're covering all 5 of them every day. They're really like, science has proven those are the 5 things that overall create more happiness. And you can look up all the different studies. People earn more like in happier work environments. If they're well, there's less evidence of physical ailments. Like there's so many different things when it's a happier environment, when people are taking care of these different 5 elements.
Yeah, it's true. And the reason being is over 9 years ago, I ended up with an illness that has propelled me to make sure I make myself a priority daily. So, I mean, I hope people listening to you don't end up like me 9 years ago and start inputting all of these things now, because what you're saying ultimately is you can hit every one of these pillars just for a couple of minutes.
Yep, it doesn't have to take long at all. It
Yeah.
could be 10 minutes. If you're doing 2 minutes of each every single day, that's 10 minutes of your day. That's it.
It could be a little longer, but hey, 10 minutes to start with. That's great.
Yes, I definitely it could be more than 10 minutes. I just meant for the
No,
people who are overwhelmed.
I'm sorry. My brain went to all the times that we're either scrolling on our phones, mindlessly watching TV. So we could take some of that time and just apply it to us, instead of,
Mhm.
that's all I meant. And I didn't explain myself well.
Yeah. And it can be you can I mean, most people have heard of habit stacking, and if you haven't heard of habit stacking, it's just where you add one habit onto something you're already doing. So like if you brush your teeth every day, then you're going to add drinking a glass of water right after you've brushed your teeth. We'll use that as an example, but you can do things similar to that. So if you love scrolling your phone or like, catching up on the latest, um, I don't know, like you look like checking the stock market, for example. Well, then
Mhm,
maybe you have a cup of coffee and a glass of water at the same time, and you just are fully present. Like
mhm.
in between each sip, you see like you're scrolling, you're checking the stock market, and then you pause, and then you take your water, and you're just present with your glass of water, and you enjoy your cup of coffee. I hear so many people talk about how their morning cup of coffee is such a ritual. And I can really enjoy a cup of coffee, and then I can also you're one of those people,
I am
but
one of those people.
do you also have days where you're like, "I just want caffeine, get it in me as soon as possible. I'm tired," like, and you don't enjoy it, you're just like, "I need that little extra oomph to get me going." So, as simple as pausing, taking a sip, enjoying the present moment, that takes care of the mindfulness. If you add water in there, you're taking care of the physical element. If you add in the stock market, you're learning. So you've got the intellectual well-being. If you happen to get up and stretch in between, you've got more of the physical movement. If you're sitting next to somebody you love, you have the relational well-being. If you talk about your emotions in the middle of it, or you just allow yourself to be present and feel, you literally hit all 5 areas. It doesn't have to be that complicated.
No. I totally agree, and especially if you haven't started, it's little all day long. So these are all great examples, and yes, I'm definitely one of those with the coffee, but it is my sit down and just I love my coffee. So that is a mindful
Mhm.
relaxation first start for me. So yes,
That's
yes, it's a perfect example.
So you're hitting the spiritual element right there.
Mhm.
Spiritual well-being with your cup of coffee.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here. You have given so many pointers and so much for people to think about. I would really appreciate if you could share where people can reach out to you.
So one of my favorite places to hang out is Instagram. So Instagram, I'm Allison Fab, 2 L's and an I. So ALLISON and then Fab, FAB. You can find me at fabover.com or allisonfab.com as well. And then I also have another website. It's happyandsuccessful.org. But those are the places. Instagram's probably the place I'm most consistent on. It's just the easiest. And I like to keep things as easy and simple as possible
Mm.
when I'm doing well. When I'm not overcomplicating my own life.
Because we all do it.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yes. I used to spend a lot of time talking about the messy middle, and um I'm I'm not in the same messy middle that I was for most of my life, but it's still there. It's a piece of all of us, right? We have again, everything is part of the human experience. There's things that feel good and things that don't feel good, but yeah, those are the places that you can usually find me.
Thank you so much for joining me. And I want everybody to enjoy the rest of your Thursday and create lasting change. This series is helping everybody to create lasting change with so many different tools and different ways to do that. So thank you all. And thank you so much, Allison.
Thank you.